Now, in another aggressive move aimed at frustrating those who want to corruptly influence the 2023 general elections and to control the amount of cash in circulation, the Central Bank of Nigeria is introducing a series of new controls. It's imposed cash withdrawal limits for banks and other financial institutions, restricting over-the-counter withdrawals by individuals and businesses to 100,000 and 500,000 naira respectively. This comes after the CBN began the distribution of its newly designed banknotes, which it says will help contain inflation and check counterfeiting and corruption. So how sustainable are all these restrictions, and what could be their cumulative impact? Are they likely to prevent corrupt politicians from gaming the system? And what will be the effect on businesses and cash-based informal sector enterprises? Well, from this, I'm joined now from our studios in London by the economist and public policy scholar Tope Fasua. And here in Abuja, I'm also joined by the international economist, political and business analyst and CEO at Business Africa Events Limited, Christian Udechukwu. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. And let me come to you first in London, Tope Fasua. What's your reaction to this policy? Do you see any problems? Are there lots of technical glitches that could get in the way?
Right, thank you very much for inviting me to the show. First of all, I'd want to say that if that policy is going to have effect on 2023 politics, is going to be circumstantial, tangential. I doubt if the central bank would have made the policy specifically to target voters, because that will imply that the central bank is now directly involved in politics, which I think that the thing about currency redesignation as well as this new policy on cash withdrawal is basically a monetary policy function, basically a currency management function. And of course, yes, I think that I've heard a few complaints about, what this is going to do to people who, informal sector, which is maybe 60% of our economy. And these are the guys that actually deal more in cash. But of course, lately, we'll see that there's been so many innovations in the financial sector in Nigeria that has actually got even people who do some of the informal businesses to get POSs, to deal with cards, to do transfers. Many people who never thought they would have found themselves becoming bank tellers, because a lot of the jobs that were being done by personnel in the banks have been pushed back to the customer. And this is not only in the banking sector, in almost everywhere, so you're going to do it, you're going to pay the bank for being able to do the work that they used to do, that staff used to do, and you're going to have to pay them and do it yourself. So, everybody now knows how to see it and use their phone and make transfers and so on. However, so I could tell you two or three other objectives that this new policy will achieve. For example, the whole idea is to limit the cash in circulation towards reducing inflation or taming inflation, or towards reducing how much cash in circulation goes after the dollar, in the so-called black market, and therefore creates that wide gorge between the so-called black market and the official rate and so on. And of course, to tackle corruption, because at the end of the day, all that slush of cash, the very critical thing is if you do a big contract, for example, somewhere and asking you for bribes, chances are that you probably will not be able to get the money for them, except they stave it over a long period of time, and nobody will accept a bribe in transfer that can be recorded, and evidenced, as well. So the thing about the what it's going to do to the elections coming next year is only tangential, and I'm sure whatever the case may be, politicians who need to worry about that are worrying. That is their worry. But the financial sector must keep on moving and developing and gaining grounds and also aligning what goes on abroad. In the UK, where I am right now, of course, the cash is almost non-existent. You'd hardly find anyone holding £100 in a shop or anything, and everybody is moving in that direction.
Okay, thank you for that opening sort of salvo. Tope. Let me come to you, Christian Udechukwu. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's start with, I guess the big concern at the moment is about vote buying. And if you look at a lot of the newspapers, they're headlining this particular topic with and linking it to vote buying. How is this move likely to affect that?
Thank you, Charles, for having me on the program. I think that the limits on cash withdrawal does not necessarily translate to a direct impact on vote buying by politicians. Because the individuals withdrawing cash over the counter, or organizations withdrawing cash over the counter, does not necessarily translate to field operations for politicians. And of course, one of the things you find really is that the fundamental principle guiding the relationship between banks and the customer is that you can take your money to the bank, sign a couple of papers, leave it with them, come back tomorrow or anytime you wish, and ask for the money and get it. Now, any constraint on that relationship that deprives you of access to the cash itself when you want it can affect your confidence in the bank itself, if not the system. So I think that there's a need for guidance. Why am I saying that? Well, I think that given the cash-based lifestyle that most Nigerians are used to, imposing limitations suddenly on that lifestyle can have a blowback. I think that perhaps there would have been the CBN's intent of migrating Nigeria from a cash-based economy to a cashless system is very commendable, and it's an excellent initiative. From the days of Soludo through the era of Sanusi, and now CBN Governor Emefiele is consolidating on that. It's a brilliant initiative, and it's one that should be encouraged and sustained. But it has to be managed alongside the confidence of the public that the CBN is not moving towards depriving them of access to their cash, and then punishing them when they really have need for it. I mean, the 10% charge if you have to draw anything over 500,000 naira seems a bit on the high side. I mean, if you're an MSME and you need 500,000 cash, you're having to leave 50,000 naira cash on the table for the commercial bank, in addition to all the other charges they're going to charge you. And if you're drawing 10 million, then you're leaving a whole million naira on the table for them for doing practically nothing, just accessing your money. So I can see that there will be some issues with the limitation and the penalties. I can understand 1 or 2% charge for drawing cash over the counter, but 10% is a bit steep. And the other thing really is that experience on the field shows that the infrastructure to support the cashless system has not been sufficiently developed. Why? Well, because it is dependent on the investment by the banks and merchant acquirers. I would have liked to see a situation where perhaps prior to the introduction of this policy, the CBN had initiated a policy to consolidate the payment system infrastructure to allow for greater interoperability and greater interconnectivity. That means that if you go to any gas station, fuel station, in any restaurant or wherever you are, and you bring out any card issued by any bank, whatever POS they have there will accept it. That is not the experience presently. So you find that some banks have a more efficient point of payment system, and others you'll have to try many times over while they're waving the POS in the air to see if they can get connection. Now, even now that there are fuel scarcities, for example, you find people queuing for an hour or two to get to the service point, and then when they get there, the POS is not accepting the card that they have, and they refuse to make way. So there are practical, real issues, and the notion that the ATMs are going to be serving smaller denominations as opposed to the big denomination creates a problem. If you draw 100,000 naira, for example, on a 200,000, on a 200 naira denomination, you have a larger bunch of money that is evident to everybody around you.
But there's a limit to what you can withdraw, though.
No, you can withdraw 100,000 naira, as an individual in a week, and 100,000 naira really. You can do at a standpoint on an ATM maybe like in 5 minutes. But when you're holding 100,000 naira in 200 naira denomination, it's very evident to everybody. It can be a risk to you. Right. But if you draw 100,000 naira in 1,000 naira denomination, it's practically invisible to anybody. So there are some degree of fine-tuning that the CBN needs to do so that policies that have good intentions, that are economically beneficial to both the system and to Nigeria, does not seem to blow back negatively on Nigerians, leading to unintended consequences, for which one must be very careful.
That's a good point. Let me come to you, Tope Fasua, just coming off the back of what Christian was saying. I mean, do you see this policy leading to social problems? Because some have suggested that when people hold back from paying money into the bank, they'll be carrying more cash around, and that might lead to more robberies and crime.
Oh, well, yeah, okay. What I expect is that this is not a, one-size-fits-all TINA, there is no alternative kind of policy. I expect also that the central bank will put its ears to the ground to be able to make amendments where necessary, especially as it affects the most vulnerable amongst us. And the most vulnerable are those poor people doing their business, the informal economy, the people in the market, the artisans and what have you. And I believe that they have feedback mechanisms to know exactly how this policy will affect them. However, I believe that they also want to drive the policy through as a kind of shock therapy, if you ask me, because Nigeria's economy is quite financialized, if you ask me, and we've also adopted quite a few innovations in the financial markets, even beyond the real sector. I would have been happier if we were also innovating in the real sector the way we are innovating in the financial sector. Our banks seem to be running ahead of the rest of the economy, far ahead, And of course, there are innovations that are still in the works that may make this workable. So I think the central bank is pushing this out to say, listen, let's force these guys to adopt, e-banking, electronic banking, even more than we have adopted it. For example, that's the reason why they're saying that they don't want to pay more than 200 naira from the ATM machine. And therefore, that means that the 1,500 will be scarcer to see, except maybe you request for it from your bank specifically. And of course, since they are limiting the amount of cash, then they're also targeting the cash management expenses for the country, meaning that the country will be spending less in printing money, withdrawing money, briquetting money and all of those, while people move more into electronic banking. And of course, the banks are also quick on the uptake. Over the break, I saw one of the banks which is advertising a virtual card. So that's a card that you hold in your phone, and that's what they use in many parts of the developed countries these days, especially post-COVID. People have gone virtual. And of course, Nigeria is also working on something they call a sort of universal card that will be resident in the central bank. And with this card, like in India, they have what they call the Rupee. In China, they have what they call the Union Pay. This card takes you everywhere, And I think that if we manage this well too, we should be looking at a point where the naira becomes a bit convertible and no longer a pariah currency. With that card issued by the central bank, which the central bank can give a bit of backing to, someone should be able to take it abroad and spend money within limits, so that we begin to move away from this pariah state that we are in. I think what the central bank is trying to do is to, at least to claim some of its glory back as an institution, a policy institution that makes policy and does its own work, like every institution should. And of course, his duty is to rein in inflation, however it is they can. If there's less cash in circulation, then we can rein in inflation. So not only inflation, corruption, currency management, expenses, and what have you. So is it going to have an impact on society? I doubt. Again, yes, if we're paying 200 naira at the ATM, and you can only take 20 naira, I don't see why people would then begin begin to target people who are carrying maybe 20,000 naira in their pockets, or even at most 100,000 naira from the bank. I don't see why. I think that the opposite is likely to happen. The opposite is likely to happen,
right.
whereby, if we are spending less money on all of these things, then we can channel more money into proper poverty eradication programs and reduce crime in society.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for that. And Christian, I mean, we haven't quite got to that stage of cashless society. I mean, you and I were talking earlier, you were giving the example of a business such as a cattle herder, for example. He wants his money in cash. He's coming from his village and he wants that money in cash. And I mean, you're talking about maybe several cows, and it's going to amount to a considerable, amount of money. And in those circumstances, it sounds like the parallel market is going to dominate, because more and more people are going to be going there for their cash funds.
Well, Charles, I think the first thing, you're correct. There's going to be that pressure. But the first thing to correct really is that the Central Bank of Nigeria has not lost any glory that it is seeking to regain by pursuing a cashless policy. It is a policy that is consistent with the reforms in the financial and banking system that has been ongoing for quite a long time now. The only challenge really is that under the present policy format, the timeline for its execution is very short. And that is why there's concern that it may have unintended consequences, because there's not enough time for both public enlightenment, public education, and for people to be aware, to be made aware that you cannot go into the bank and pay in as an individual, 5 million perhaps that you have left under your bed, and you have the comfort of sleeping on top of it, and then go back the next day to collect the same amount of money. It's a shock to the system. So people need to be able to be educated, to be informed of the impact which this policy will have on them. And as I said, I've seen real, practical situations where people who have difficulty accessing their money are enraged. I mean, there are extreme examples from Lebanon recently. So what we're saying basically is that this is an excellent policy, and it is consistent with the traditions of CBN, and it's one that should be logically implemented. But as I say, within the industry itself, there are specific reforms that needs to happen. The cash management systems, under even what we have now before this new intervention, leaves a lot of space for improvement, because when you go to an ATM gallery, it is most often than not unlikely that all the ATMs have cash in them, which means that the cash management, those who refill the ATMs, do not do them at the speed and at the pace that they should. I mean, this policy will require, for example, that the ATMs have AI in them, artificial intelligence that is able to alert the cash management company that this ATM vault is empty and therefore should be refilled. And you're also assuming that the bank branches where some of these ATMs are, and some that are out of branch locations, are able to notify whoever the cash managers are that they've run out of cash. So, because where you have less cash in the system, the pressure to access those points from which you're able to reach cash will be very high. So, there are issues. And as I say, even when you have the cards,
right,
and you now need to make your payments, you come to some hotels, they have just one POS from one particular bank. And ordinarily, you would then expect that if you had a card that was from another bank other than the one that issued them with the POS, that it will be interoperable. That means that they are able to slot your card in that system and take money out of your card. But that is not what happens. They will tell you they have only 2 banks or something, and you'll have to deal with that. So really, there's a need to adjust the timeline for the implementation, because the matter of managing elections and managing politicians who would want to distort the electoral process, the burden of managing them cannot be transferred to the millions of Nigerians who have absolutely nothing to do with the political
that's a
battles
good
that
point.
used to be fought.
Let me come to you, Tope. We've got like 2 minutes left, so if you could limit your answer to about a minute, that'll give Christian also a chance to say a final word before we have to go. But just coming off the back of what Christian was saying, is it your sense, in conclusion and in summary, that this will limit things like corruption, vote buying during the election and leading up to it, because people won't be able to move large amounts of cash around?
Absolutely. Well, absolutely it should. Among other crimes, I believe that vote buying is a crime. Electoral offenses are crimes as well. But not only that, it'll limit corruption. Like I said earlier, it's a big blow to corruption as well, and also crimes. And I mean, now people get kidnapped for 50 million, 100 million, 200 million, billions of naira, and all of that. You know, I mean, now it's going to be incredibly difficult to get money for them. That business, they have to go out of business. So we back it up with the security forces, and this is a new Nigeria in the making. And whether we like it or not, I've always said that nothing lasts forever, not even the backwardness of Nigeria, not even the corruption, the kidnapping, the insecurity that we've been facing. And this is, and I've always positioned also, and also informed those who should listen that, look, finance is a key weapon that we should use to curb some of the crimes and anomalies in our society. You follow the money. One thing that Nigerians may worry about is the fact that now that more information will be greeded about your finances, chances are that you are going to have to pay more taxes, like they do elsewhere in the world. So people don't want to pay taxes, but we have to pay up in order to have a better society. Thank you very much.
Tope, thank you very much indeed. And a final word from you, Christian, the same question really. It's your sense that this will limit the amount of cash that's moving around and affect, I mean, like Tope was saying, you know, reduce the things like, you know, corruption and crime and all the rest of it?
Well, definitely the policy will limit the amount of cash in circulation, because that is the purpose of the policy. All we're saying is that the timeline needs adjustment. There's the need to invest in infrastructure, perhaps force all the banks to collapse all the ATMs and all the payment points and points of payment into a single infrastructure company for payment systems, so that all the banks are investing in upgrade and modernization and all that, and all the merchant points are integrated into one single network that supports the payment system, so that it's not like one POS is working and the other one is not, because they are all in one network. So that might be one single straight solution, but it takes time. Right. And the second thing to note is
very
that,
briefly,
the literacy level in the country is very low. And when we're talking about the e-payment systems and so on, we always need to be mindful of that large segment of the population that might not be understanding that the purpose of this policy is to protect and enhance efficiency in their economic life.
Right.
So public education and enlightenment is very important. I worry whether the time between now and the end of the program and the implementation and closure for that window of this policy, whether there's enough time for people to understand.
So there's a question mark over whether there's enough time. Yes. Christian Udechukwu in Abuja here with me, and Tope Fasua in London. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Charles.